Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the latest in our series of irishborderpoll.com podcasts with, as I say, the leading lights, the grand fromages of Northern Ireland's public affairs. Tonight, we're delighted to be joined by Alex Kane, who is a man who probably needs no introduction to many people. He is a ubiquitous and sagacious chronicler and interpreter of Northern Ireland's public affairs across a range of newspapers and broadcasters. Alex is also a former director of communications for the Ulster Unionist Party, when that was a big job. I think it's fair to say, Alex, you're probably the preeminent kind of voice, apart from the politicians within unionism and all of that. You're the kind of key person that people look to kind of understand the unionist mindset, certainly probably for nationalists and other people. But before we get into that, can I just ask you a little bit to talk about your early life, which you write about very movingly every now and again. Every time you're not talking about politics, you do write these lovely pieces about your early life, and they're very reflective, and it's not usual often that in politics and journalism that people write like that. So tell us a little bit about your early life. Tell us little bit about who you are, who your people are, where you're from and growing up.
Well, I suppose originally I don't know who my people are because I was adopted when I was 4 years old, and I know nothing about my birth parents. I mean, absolutely nothing about their religion, nothing about their background, nothing about any possible siblings, which is quite odd when you think about it, because psychiatrists will tell you that children around the age of 3, 4, 5 do have set memories. They have things that they recall. They may not recall exact detail, but a smell or a color or a sound, resonates with them as a remembrance of the past. I don't have any of that. I've absolutely no memory of that at all. In fact, my first memory, but even the time I was in the orphanage and I was there for almost 2 years, I've absolutely no memory of anything that happened there. So my presumption is, and I've talked to some people about this, that whatever it was so traumatic that my brain closed it down. And thank God it did, because I've talked to people who've been in orphanages, who've been in very difficult situations, and their brain hasn't switched it down, and they live with it, every waking day. So I still have moments, really black periods. I've fought with depression my entire life, since I was 6, and I describe him, I call him Mr. D. And as I say, I have no idea when he's coming. I have no idea how hard he's going to hit. I have no idea how long he's going to stay. But I have, thank goodness, because I've carried my partner and the children. I have a stability in my life. But I was adopted when I was 6. Now, I was going to say oddly enough, but there's nothing odd about it at all. Just the way it happened to be. My adoptive father, Sam Kane, was a senior member of the Orange Order in Armagh. He was a senior member of the Ulster Unionist Party, and this was a time before, when the Ulster Unionists ran Northern Ireland.
Yeah,
and he was also a senior member of the Presbyterian Church, which is in essence the 3 pillars of unionism, the Orange Order, the Ulster Unionist Party, and the Presbyterian Church. So I was brought up in a unionist background, and I treasure this, and I think it's shaped who I am. Maybe it's because of my adoption, or maybe because he was just a genuinely liberal guy. And every time you say a genuinely liberal guy, and people say, well, he was a unionist and an orange man, there were genuinely liberal guys at that time who knew the change was coming. Right. But the best advice, the advice he gave me, and it stuck with me, and it reflects in my writing and in my commentary and so on. When I was 18, my first vote was for the Northern Ireland Assembly in 1973, which is, if you like, the power sharing assembly, when the Unionist Party, as usual, unionism in general, as usual, was split on the issue. And I asked my dad, I said, look, it's going to be my first vote. I am minded because of my age. I just think that it looks like change. It looks like we need change. So, I mean, and I quite like what Brian Faulkner is doing. I quite like the idea that we have power sharing. I had never really experienced any sense of, been bombed or threatened or bullied or something like that. But I just thought change was good. And I said, do you mind? And I asked him, because it was his background, because the Unionist Party mattered to him. He was friends with Faulkner, but he was also friends with Bill Craig and people like that. And I said, I minded Dad to vote for Brian Faulkner, to vote for the pro-Sunningdale candidates. And the advice he gave me, and it stuck with me ever, about 55 something years ago, he just said, look, when you get to my age, and he was about 63 at the time, he said, when you get to my age, you will have enough baggage of your own. Do not start your journey with my baggage. it's advice I now give my own children when they sometimes would say, well, Dad, if there's a border poll or something, I'll say, this is what your grandfather told me, and I think it's good enough advice for you. I suppose that has always been, and maybe it's because of the adoption, because I don't know the full background, that the question of identity has always been an issue for me, because sometimes people say, well, how did so and so end up in a loyalist paramilitary group? How did somebody else end up in an IRA? What is it that makes people decide to choose a political route and some to choose a paramilitary route? And I say because you don't know, because you've no idea what each individual, whatever the big issues of whether it's protecting the unionism or trying to get a united Ireland, you never know the real reason why each person makes that choice. Because we make a choice. Everyone who picks up a weapon or joins a paramilitary organization makes the choice to do that. And other people like me who lift up the pen and decide to try and explain politics, but try and explain it from one perception, we make that choice. So oddly enough, and I know I do get criticized for this, I try not to condemn people for the choices they make, even if I think they're immoral. I just think I look at my own background and think, well, where have I come from? And I remember David Irvine, wonderful David Irvine, who said to me, knew about my adoption and so on. He said, Alex, if you hadn't been adopted, if you'd been left running around some loyalist background, you would be doing what I'm doing now. You would be the talker. You would be the political guy, because it clearly there's something in your blood is political. So that's my background. It's that whole thing that I lived, and I'm 60. I'll be 69 in 2 months or something like that. So I've lived with politics, my entire life.
I've got a follow-up question for you. It very nicely, I hope, just picks up and segues from what you've just said. Two things really, back-to-back question really. Tell us a bit about your time as Director of Communications for the Ulster Unionist Party and how you got into that. But what I'm intrigued about as well is why you've never gone into elected politics yourself, because often the very best people are the people who don't go into it, but are part of the political firmament in another way. Tell us a little bit about the decisions that you've made.
Well, I suppose in terms of the elective side, I would be unwhippable. And it's just this thing, when you're in politics, you'll know the game that, you're trying to say to people, do this or I will destroy your career. Do this or you are in big trouble, mate. And I am one of those people, and I don't think I'm, extraordinary or unusual. I think a lot of people are willing to do it. But, if you ask me something, I think long and hard about it. And if somebody says to me, Alex, I think you should vote that way, I will go, there's no way on God's earth I'm voting that way. But I also know you can't run a political party on the basis of whether it's 20 assembly members or 5 or whatever. You can't run it on the basis you allow them all to make up their own minds. They have to come to a common point at which they say, I'm not happy with this, but I will go along with the party line. I would have always found that extraordinarily difficult. And in terms of the director of comms, I came to that quite late, actually, because it wasn't until about 2007 or something like that. Before that, I'd been based in the assembly from 98, 99, working for some assembly members and giving sort of general advice and doing some speech writing and having conversations where the conversations mattered, and going out sometimes with the nod of approval from David Trimble and others, like, go there, talk to them, take all the questions and feed it back, and so on, which is what I like doing. I suppose if somebody said, what is your, if I'd like to be remembered, that's a vanity thing. If I'd like people to say, well, do you know something? He came and he talked and he listened, and if he disagreed, he explained why he disagreed, but he was always willing to give a fair hearing, which is why it's one of the things I'm proud of, that my social media site, I say I only do Twitter, but I don't get into fights, and most people, I get all sorts of people on it from every political party, and so many people say to me, I disagree with you, Alex, but actually I quite enjoy the civility on your site, because it's one of those I welcome people in. I say, if you want to talk, if you want to communicate, but don't start swearing like troopers, and don't pick a fight for the sheer hell of picking it. It's not one of those sites where you're trying to rub people up and just get annoy people. I want people to come away, as I like to come away from a conversation with, I've learned from that. Someone has just told me something, and maybe it's someone who's anonymous, but they've been following me. We've followed each other long enough, so I know they're kosher. And I like to come away from conversations with that feeling that we've both helped each other. Because at the end of the day, Gavin, it doesn't matter whether it's United Kingdom or United Ireland. At the end of the day, we're going to have to live with each other. And the more civility there is in living with each other, the better. Because really, this notion that you can just trump somebody with complete incivility and then expect things to be, it doesn't, life does not work like that.
Thanks. That's really interesting. I think it's always quite interesting just to get a sense of because you're a very prominent commentator, that people see you and read your stuff constantly. It's just very interesting just to spend a few minutes just getting a flavour of who you are and your background, really. I'll pass over to Kevin Rooney. He's got some other questions for you, Alex. Kevin?
Brilliant, Kevin. Thanks, Alex. Let's get into the more overtly political questions now. So just reading a couple of your recent articles about unionism and some of the terms that you used. You said unionism appears demoralized, angry, defensive, spooked, fractious, finger pointing, name calling. Why is that, Alex? Why does unionism appear, at least at face value, in a weak position?
I think you need to look at and it's not an excuse, I think it's just a simple reality. You need to look at the psychology of unionism, the psyche of unionism, because I think if you go back to the very beginning, back to the first Home Rule crisis and so on, that sudden realization that something was going wrong from their perspective, that there was a challenge to their identity, a challenge to their culture, a challenge to their citizenship, and all the way through for that first, whatever, from 1886 to 1905, 1906, when they thought they were okay. They thought the Parliament would be on the side. They thought that the Conservatives would be on their side. So it came as a huge shock when eventually, whereas Carson said, they were used as puppets, they were abandoned, and they got a Northern Ireland, which they didn't want. Carson and Craig never wanted partition. Okay, they wanted to keep all of Ireland within the United Kingdom. They didn't want, their own government. They never wanted to, because having your own government that's a sign of difference. And I think it was I can't remember, Patricia Devlin. I can't remember who used the exact phrase now about a place apart. That sense of being a place apart has always been difficult for unions, because it's very hard to say we are full integral citizens of the United Kingdom, but we have our own government, we have our own political parties, we have our own legislation. And I think that sense, when they got to 1921, there was no great moment of, yes, we've got what we wanted. They never wanted it. But I think more important than that, I think unionism started it sort of filtered into their psyche in 1921 when Stormont came along. That there were enemies to the south of them, that there were enemies to the east of them, that there were enemies internally, that a third of the population, were all closet Republicans and couldn't be trusted, which fed into the next thing, which is that unionism, this, united we stand, not an inch this far and no further, that whole Lutheran thing, this sense of, you put 5 unionists in a room, and I say this half jokingly, but 5 unionists in a room, and within 20 minutes of a conversation, they'll be Lundy spotting. They'll be trying to find out which one of them will turn, which one will be the compromiser, which one will be the accommodator, and so on. So that is just part of the unionist psyche, and I don't condemn it, because I think given the circumstances of where they found themselves, it was never a place of victory. It was always a place where they sensed they were constantly under attack, constantly under the fear of being abandoned, and constantly believing that within their own tribe they would be betrayed as well. And if you spend 100 years or so with that psyche, it makes you fractious, it makes you difficult, it makes you worried, it makes you spooked. All those words I use in regular columns when trying to explain unionism.
Okay, and that's brilliant. So that's very interesting for me, because you're effectively saying it's the structure of ever since partition that been a little bit different from the rest of the United Kingdom level. And then the second level is the literal psychology of unionism on the back foot and defensive. Okay, so that idea that they're outliers links to a second question. It overlaps with this. What's your take on the recent general election? Do you think that reinforces the sense of unionist insecurity, or do you think that point's been overplayed by some commentators in terms of the election results?
I don't think it has been overplayed, because you just bear one simple reality, which unionists will tell you. We are still here after 100 years. But after 100 years, we have 4 unionist parties, 5 if you count the local Conservatives, in open disagreement with each other. You have Jim Allister saying that unionism, not just a small section, but unionism in Northern Ireland has been betrayed by the Democratic Unionist Party and the Ulster Unionist Party. You have the Ulster Unionist Party saying it's the stupidity of the TUV and the arrogance of the DUP, which has led to this mess that, that we have the Northern Ireland Protocol and the Windsor Framework, not simply because the British government dumped it on us, but because they would argue, well, we gave them no choice. You voted for Brexit. You wanted the hardest of hard Brexit. So here we are, a century on, and unionism is still having this battle, and it's an intra-battle. You know, I think somebody once said, I've never actually bothered checking it, but maybe somebody listening to this will, said that if you look from about 1970, I think it's the W.D. Flack's original and Sidney Elliott, the Northern Ireland political directory. But if you look through that from about maybe 68, 70, right the way through till the end of the 70s, you find between 35 and 40 unionist, loyalist political vehicles, you know, who at one time or another were offering candidates for selection, but all not because they were claiming to be, fighting, taking on the SDLP or Sinn Fein or republicanism or nationalism, but because they were taking on other unionists, because those other unionists were the ones who were going to betray them. It's an odd thing that one of the great ironies, paradoxes of the past few years, the past 50 years maybe, is deep down when you talk more, unionists will tell you privately, very rarely publicly, will tell you privately, they fear more what other unionists are going to do to them than they fear what Sinn Fein and nationalism, because they know what Sinn Fein and the SDLP will do. They want a united Ireland. They know that is their, raison d'etre. That's what they will do. But unionism, they're never quite sure. I mean, do unionists want devolution? Do they want integration? Do they want, do they want good relationships with the Irish government? Do they want better relationships with Scotland? There's so many. After all these years, we're still having these debates. And I mean, I keep saying, and we may come back to it later, but I'll just say, well, it's on my mind now, that I hear over and over again when you listen to Ireland's Future and other nationalist groupings and political parties. They have these deep conversations. They discuss where they want to be in 5, 10, 15 years' time. The one thing unionism doesn't do collectively, in my lifetime, unionism, I don't just mean the political unionism, the political parties, I mean all of it. The Orange Order, the loyalists, the small U unionists, liberal unionists, latte drinking unionists, whatever description you want, but that huge unionist family, which is a whole complexity and avalanche of subsets, has never in my lifetime sat down and talked to itself and say, well, who are we? What are we? What do we want? We all know it's about, ask any union, it's simple, to stay in the United Kingdom. But then ask them the next question, well, what's the best way of doing that? And then all hell breaks loose because there's so much disagreement on what you do. So I think that in that sense, I think, I can't remember the beginning of your question now, Kevin, but in that sense, I think it was the election thing. I think we're still having, right now, you go back 50 years almost to the day, unionism was having a huge battle over Sunningdale. Sunningdale had just, Faulkner had resigned, was it May the 28th or something like that? I think just about now, the Secretary of State, Merlin Rees, had introduced the Constitution Act for the Convention of Northern Ireland to see if there were what the alternative to Sunningdale would be. We are still having within unionism the same argument about, if we don't like the protocol and we don't like the Windsor framework and we don't like what the Conservatives did and we don't like what Hilary Benn's suggesting or Keir Starmer, well, what should we do next? But we never have that conversation with unionism. We just have it with party political unionism, which by my reckoning now, the political electoral unionism is around 43%. That's not a majority of unionism. So they need to work out why they are not getting a majority of unionism. And the only way you do that is talk to each other.
Well, funny enough, you're anticipating a question I was going to ask you in about 5 or 10 minutes, but I actually want to drill down on something you said, Alex, at the risk of maybe potentially being boring, but I think it's the opposite of being boring. And it is this like fragmentation of unionism, be it the UUP, the TUV, the DUP. You could talk about other wee groups, the PUP or whatever. So I've heard a couple of unionist commentators say that actually this is a sign of strength. This is pluralism, that this is a richness of unionism, and that you shouldn't automatically assume that this is a weakness. And when they all come out to vote for the different parties, that maximizes the amount of votes for pro-union parties. Can I just get you to come back again? You are saying that this variety, you can call it a rich diversity of unionist parties, or you could call it a division, a split, a fragmentation of unionist parties. Is there an argument to say that this is a strength, or is it in fact a clear weakness?
I think you could make the argument that it's a strength if you said that the multiplicity of parties represented all of unionism. But when the multiplicity of parties, it tends to be, if you like, a fracturing of the TUV. The DUP exists and still exists. I mean, its original offshoot was from the Ulster Unionist Party. The TUV is an offshoot from the DUP. And most of the little political parties that form, they're splinter groups. It's like that form of Protestantism, what they used to call the Iron Hall churches, where they just have an argument with each other, and half the congregation goes away and meets in a local barn or somewhere like that. And unionists had this thing years ago when it was I think maybe that's the problem. I'm just thinking about this. Maybe that's the problem, that when you govern a country for 50 years, when there's no real electoral opposition to you from your own side, you get this notion that it is one big happy family. But the reality, I think, it never was one big happy family. It was only because the government was so strong and it had no fear of being done away with that it was able to, if you like, squash down unionist opposition. So what happened from about 1970 onwards, when you had a plethora of the Vanguard Party, the PUP, the Popular Unionist Party, and the UUUC, the United Ulster Unionist Movement, you name them and they were there. They were all splitting off from each other, all trying to find out the weakness or where the Ulster Unionist Party had failed. And that's fine, Kevin, if you say there's a plurality there, and that plurality is what will bring out different voters. It's not really. What it's doing is picking out all the people who used to vote for the Ulster Unionist Party 50 years ago and just subdividing them into other parties. So the overall vote is never going up. But the problem, I think, in all of this is that let's call it that small U. Let's call it those people who are pro-union but don't vote unionist. I mean, it's another one of those paradoxes. You'll meet lots of people who are now voting alliance will say, oh no, don't worry, Alex, in the event of a border poll, I will vote to stay in the United Kingdom. But I don't feel comfortable voting for a unionist party because they don't represent my values. So that's fine. Have the plurality. I couldn't care less if you have the plurality. I mean, politics is great and people getting involved in voting is great. But we don't, within unionism, within, if you like, party political unionism, we don't have those parties which are picking off that those subsects of unionism I was talking about, that pro-union element, who are, let's call them civic unionists, small unionists, what you like. They are they're pro-UK, pro-union, but not unionist. There's no party for them. And because there's no party for them, they went to the paradox of the Alliance Party, which is agnostic on the union, and because it's agnostic on the union, you'll have unions saying, oh, it's a nationalist light party, it's a Republican light party. It's nothing of the sort. It's just a party that recognized before unionism recognized people whose priority is not the union because there's no border poll. Their priority is protecting the union or their concept of the union within a Northern Ireland that works, within a Northern Ireland which seems at peace with itself, with an assembly which actually prioritizes not the constitutional issue every single day, and in some cases this applies to Sinn Fein, the SDLP, but prioritizes health, prioritizes education, because it goes back to what I said right at the beginning. Whether it's a United Ireland or whether it's a United Kingdom, we have to make sure, whatever government it is, whether it's direct rule from Westminster, rule from an assembly, or rule from the Dáil, we have to make sure that everyone gets the best education they can, gets the best health they can, gets the best infrastructure, gets the best housing, gets the best economy, gets the best jobs. And I think, to me, I'd call me old-fashioned, to me that is what real politics is about. And my experience of my writing and talking on panels I do, there is an audience for that within unionism, within pro-unionist, small pro-union, which will tell you we don't hear that in unionism, Alex, which is why we don't vote for unionist parties.
Okay. By the way, Alex, you're freezing for a second here and there, and you're coming back, but we won't worry about it. We'll just plow on. And Kevin, don't worry, mate. Don't worry, Mr. Tyson. Kevin Maher, we'll come back to you in a wee minute. This is my last question, squeezing in. Now, you've already touched on it, Alex, but I want to just maybe push it even further. So with that very last sentence or two that you were talking about, I was going to ask the question, well, how does unionism win the case for the union? How does it overcome its problem of the fragmentation, the splits that you talked about? So is that your recipe then, that you talk more bread and butter politics as a way of winning more people to the union? Or do you think, at the risk of being a pessimist, really it's impossible to square the circle of these different groups within unionism? I mean, if you were the leader of unionism and they said, Alex, help us out here, how do we heal some of our problems and win more people to the union? And you had 60 seconds to tell them, what precisely would you say?
Do you know something? I'll be optimistic in this one. I think if I was leader of unionism, and certainly advice I give to the leaders of unionism is what I've been saying for years and what I've been saying to you earlier there. Talk to each other. Instead of saying we won't talk to the government, or we won't talk to Ireland's future, or we won't talk to A, B, C, or D, talk to your own community. Talk to all the subsets of that community. It may be a 2 or 3 year project, but it will be worth doing, because there are huge sections of people who we know from evidence and statistics which suggest that in a border poll they will vote to remain in the United Kingdom, but they can't be taken for granted. They can't be banked, and we've never bothered our Barneys in the past 50 years to reach out to those people to say, look, this is what it means to be a unionist. This is what we believe in. We all want to stay in the United Kingdom. So what do we need to do for you to make you willing to come? Or do we, does another party, people keep saying, oh, Jim Alice would say, oh, well, we need a party to represent this, and the PUP is smaller, would say we need a party to represent this. Where is the Unionist Party to represent that growing demographic of people who are admit to being small U unionists, but say we've no Unionist Party to vote for? So that would be my thing. Instead of constantly the four of you fighting, the four parties fighting with each other, actually expand it a bit and talk, and you might discover that there will be fresh blood, fresh ideas, new thinking, and so on, because that's what unionism needs. We're constantly fighting. As I said to you earlier, we're fighting a battle that we were fighting 50 years ago and didn't win. So what's the point of fighting the same battle now?
Alex, you'd be amazed who listens to our podcast. I can just see Doug Beattie and Gavin Ramsden and Jim Oster taking notes from you there.
Oh, I think they've known for years what I think. So
yeah, that's
and I have to say, in fairness to them, even though I the nature of what I do, you have to criticize people. There are a lot of unionists in leading positions who will tell you, I know they agree with me, but it's just this thing. There is this feeling that if you move, suddenly you lose somebody along the line. That's why I say collectively open some sort of forum, do it, and it'll take a 2 or 3 year project. Get a few people involved, get some funding for it, and talk. Because I know if you look at other parties, that's how you do this. You have to. It's almost like it's a cliche, but it's almost like reinventing unionism. It's like saying it's not an existential crisis at this moment, so let's make it become an existential crisis.
Alex, it's brilliant. I'm going to hand over to Kevin. I was just thinking as you were speaking there, I wonder will there be anybody listening to our podcast going, I suppose this is supposed to be an Ireland podcast. All they're doing is talking about unionism, but I absolutely love this, talking about unionism, and it's great to hear to pick your brains on this and try and get a bit of an insight as to where you think things are at within unionism. So brilliant so far, mate. Lots more questions from me, but if Kevin Maher's still there, I'm going to bounce back.
I can see him. He's still there.
I'm still here. No, just listening away. Of course, we are irishborderpoll.com, so I'll ask you a question about an Irish border poll then, Alex. Can I turn to just the question of mechanics, which I'd just be very interested on your assessment, really. What in your view, and in the perhaps the wider unionist view, and I fully appreciate that there'll be lots of people within unionism that won't or don't want to think about these issues and don't want to formulate positions on them. Why would you be a unionist otherwise? I get that. But what do you feel would constitute reasonable circumstances for calling a border poll?
I don't know. And that's what I say. I mean, I'm actually a firm believer, and I remember first writing about it in the Irish Times, 7 or 8 years ago. I said the point will come when we have to write the terms and conditions for a border poll have to be set in stone, because the Good Friday Agreement ones are, well, they don't exist. That saying that if a Secretary of State decides that it's likely that if there were a border poll and the United Ireland argument won, that's when we'll have it. But that is flim flam. Because, until you actually say, because somebody could make an argument that, Sinn Fein being the largest party, in Westminster, the Assembly and local councils, say, well, Secretary of State, is that not, is it possible that and okay, they'd say, well, we represent 40%, but the unionists only rep 43%. Do you think it's possible or likely that if we had a border poll and both sides would have to try and win over the others alliance and all those other soft view, do you not think it's possible, likely, maybe, that the United Ireland argument would win? So you really need to set all of that in stone. And do you know something? And this may sound a bit of a heresy for some unionists, but I've been a heretic all my life, so I'm not going to change now. I think sometimes if you know the exact terms and conditions, it makes it much easier. Because my big fear, and it isn't it, we've seen Brexit, we've seen what happens when you go in somewhere unprepared. You really do need a situation where it's there, and it could be 10, 20, 30 years before it even happens, but they say, if the following 5, 6, 7 things happen, on that basis, we will call a border poll. And these will be terms and conditions agreed by both the British and Irish governments. They will say, these are the we agreed that these are the circumstances. And if it happens, we will have a meeting, we will talk to the parties, blah, blah, blah. And all things being equal, at that point, we will say there will be a border poll, not next week, but we will say maybe whatever 6 months down the line, give you time, and so on. But in this sort of hinterland, and it's fine for unionists to say that the conditions haven't been met, but you can say that because we don't know what the conditions are. But for me, who does the maths of these things, if unionism is at 43% and nationalism is at 40%, for us to win, we need at least 10 or 11% from somewhere. It's not coming from nationalism, and we can't assume and mustn't assume that, oh, well, it'll automatically come from alliance of the non-voters. You can never assume things like that. For me, from my perspective, in terms of preparation, I've always been, my view in politics as in life is, don't be surprised. Nothing should ever take you by surprise. If somebody said,
I actually really agree with you, because I think the difficulty is at the moment that if the criteria, very wispy obviously in the agreement, but it rests as a political judgment, political decision at some stage. For people in the United Ireland camp, if it doesn't look like it's ever going to materialise, they will cry sellout. For people I suspect in the unionist camp, if it bounces in out of nowhere, we're going to have a border poll because I've made a judgment about it. Yeah. They will cry sellout as well, and it's not satisfactory really for anybody. Yet there doesn't seem to be an awful lot of interest either in Dublin or in Westminster for setting out what those reasonable criteria might be. But let me just pitch this to you though. But if for example, obviously the polling is slightly problematical because it depends on methodology, you get different results and all the rest of it. But if for example, given a lot of the British media picked this point up in the recent general election, if there was a majority of the vote, not necessarily the seats, but the actual vote, when you totted up nationalist parties and unionist parties, if there was a majority of nationalist parties in the 3 sets of elections, Westminster, locals and assembly elections. So this is kind of, I guess we're looking 2027, 2028, 2029. If by 2029 that had occurred, and it's not occurred, as you keep saying, 43 to 40, that was a share of the vote in the recent Westminster election. So United Irelanders are not ahead in that election. They were marginally in the local elections, and it was fairly close in the assembly. But if there was a clean result in 3 elections, would that be sellable to political unionism as justification for a border poll?
No, and I say for both in my head and my heart, no, it won't, because I can never see a situation when unionists will say, oh, now is the time for a border poll, we accept. Because the minute you say, if the conditions are that unionism is likely to lose, there will never be a circumstance in which unionism say, oh, now's the time for border poll. Because the very sentence, yes, we accept that now is the time for a border poll, it's like going in, cutting your own head off or something like that. So I don't think.
What do you think the criteria would be then that would be reasonable? Do you think? Is there anything
Kevin, I'm not trying. Yeah, I'm not trying to get out of this. I genuinely don't know, because the big. I suppose the big unsure thing in all of this is it's going to be the others. And nobody can tell. Somebody who votes, I know people who vote Alliance, who are unionists, who tell me that they will vote for, they'll vote to stay in the United Kingdom. And I know members of the Alliance Party who will tell you they're going to vote for United Ireland. And I know some younger people who have joined Alliance and they'll say, oh, well, I'm thinking about it. Brexit has made me think about it. We don't know, because I think at the minimum, I think it's going to be 10 years, and probably longer, but at the minimum 10 years. Someone who's telling me now at the age of 25 that they would vote one way or the other, by the time they get, they've moved on to 35, they've got a partner, they've got a house, they've got a job, they've got a mortgage, they've got children. All of that changes, and all of that will play into the decision they finally make. My age, I mean, I will vote to stay in the United Kingdom, partly because I'm too old, partly because it's the way I've been. But I will never, if it vote is for United Ireland. There was a time when I said I'd probably move, but I won't move now because I think probably somebody would still want me to write things, talk over things. So I think it's a democratic decision, if that's what people want. But actually finding, it's about. And that maybe it goes back to what I was saying to Kevin's or what I was saying to both of you. Whatever happens, both sides, win or lose, we both have to be willing to live with each other. Because there's no point, winning a United Ireland vote if you have 30-40% of unionists are saying, and even a subsection that says this is unacceptable, we will not accept this, we will turn this into violence, we will make this impossible. And equally, if it's lost and then some new form of the IRA emerges and says, all this is a waste of time, all this Good Friday Agreement and the Assembly, all a waste of time, we've been screwed over by the Brits again, we're back to square one. Whatever way we make this journey, we have to, and I know this is cliche and I don't try not to do cliche, but it's the Pollyanna bit. Sometimes you have to say, we either do this together inside the United Kingdom or inside or don't do it at all. Don't risk doing it when we're not ready to do it. And I know, and that's why I say, don't get too carried away with figures. And now some of your audiences say, well, Alex would say that he's a unionist, but I like to think most of them know I'm a unionist who's willing to take risks and who's thought long and hard about all these things. I just, knowing the history of what we've lived through, that just making the decision and saying, there you go, now live with it, it's not the way to do things. It'll never work.
Do you think there's a worthy conversation though? I mean, about criteria? And I agree with you, because I think it's not satisfactory to kind of, and of course 25 years ago nobody thought we would get to probably this point, but it's not satisfactory to leave this as a political wispy judgment. There's got to be something that, I mean, again, it's either election results, polling, or perhaps something else. But is there a conversation that can be had across the aisle and also across the sea between Westminster, Dublin, Belfast, and all aspects of Belfast, where we can actually sort of say, bring some common understanding together about how this change, if there's going to be this change, might happen? Do you think that's possible? Or
I think again, I think that's inevitable, because I think just as circumstances move and elections move and figures move and so on, it's like looking for the resolution point when more and more people will say, well, what are the terms and conditions? Because you can't keep saying this. No, look, we ended up with that. I think it's paragraph 35 of the Good Friday Agreement, this thing about if it seems likely. We ended up if it seems likely, because the unionists would not have, David Trimble would not have put his signature to a deal that said there will be a border poll under the following conditions, or there will be a border poll within 50 years. That was not going to happen. And I from nationalism's point of view, the very fact that it was mentioned and said, oh, it's a possibility, they could live with that. But it was a huge gap there, and the Secretary of State said, well, whenever I decide. But even the very fact that they didn't put the term in likely, that even try to define it, explained the mess we had then. But I just think back then, let's be honest, I don't think you would have had one unionist that would have said to you in 1998, well, of course, by 2024, Sinn Fein will be the largest party in Northern Ireland. I don't think any, and that's why Trimble and the Ulster Unionist Party and the PUP and all were willing to leave it reasonably vague, because they thought it would be an issue for the next generation. And that by the time, I think deep down, I mean, I talked to David Trimble once about this, and I'm sorry I didn't record the interview because it was some interesting. I got a little bits of it in another interview, but I think it was his feeling was that, or his hope at that time was that when he signed this, he knew the risks. He knew the risks to himself and his party and so on. But I think he also thought there'd be a generational leap. That 25 years after the Good Friday Agreement, if it stayed in place, we would be in a much better place. There would be new political voices. There would be new political vehicles. And that the conversation being had about a border poll would not be between my generation, who were in their 40s, when it was signed, but it'd be a generation who had come into the parties who maybe were only in their early 30s. Who had known nothing but peace, who had known nothing but stability. And because as his hope was, that the Assembly would work, that we would find a way of, not parking the constitutional issue, but being able to build around all the other socio-economic issues that required, so that when that moment came and you examined election figures and that we need to think about this, it would have been, if you like, a much more benign political atmosphere. But that hasn't happened because the Assembly still has a bucket load of problems. But B, I think we also learnt lessons from, two lessons. We learnt lessons from the Brexit referendum, but we also learned lessons from the referenda that the South ran in, was it back in March?
Yes,
over
the family
and things like that. So this notion that referendum solve things, quite often a referendum can pick out entirely new bits of the puzzle that you never expected to be picked out, which could actually wreck the best laid plans of mice and men or whatever it is.
Can I just ask you one question? I'll pass back to my namesake in a second. You mentioned at the start about you. I think you voted for the first time in 1973 and talked a bit about Sunningdale and just I mean, you write a lot about the historical context of the missteps, the lost opportunities, both for unionists but more generally as well. I mean, it just strikes me that kind of period, and it's kind of 50 years ago at this point, but it's always struck me, right, looking at reading of history and writing about it myself, that if Faulkner, if that more liberal unionist dispensation could have held out, could have held out against the Paisley Acts, and if the British government had held the line as well, that the whole history of the last 50 years might have been very radically different if that had been able to work. I mean, where do you think that, looking back, the kind of key missteps are for Northern Ireland generally, I guess, but also specifically for unionists, if things had just been done in a different way, or if a particular personality or whoever had not wielded the influence they did, where do you think we could have got to?
I think in Faulkner's case in particular, I think O'Neill, bless him, was just too weak, and Dithery. I think obviously, I mean, again, it's a cliche, but I think, and you say this with hindsight, I wasn't alive at the time and I wasn't playing a part in politics, but you would think if you are inheriting a state and a parliament of your own and a government of your own in which you have 70% of the majority, you hold that 70%, you have what looks like power in perpetuity. The best thing to do is actually hold out the hand of friendship, to make people who are not your natural, to make people who were feeling afraid. I remember, and I know this because my adoptive parents were my father was born in Sligo, which is where his family grew up and so on, where he grew up and so on. But they moved south after partition, or they moved north, they moved to Armagh after partition, because they found that people who had been previous neighbours became very hostile towards them because they were unionists and known to be unionists. And I remember again my father saying to me, when years shortly before he died, when we were talking about unionism, and he said one thing we didn't, and he was blaming himself for this, as an Orangeman, as a unionist, he said, I should probably have known that the fear that my family felt, that my grandfather or my father and my mother felt, and your grandfather felt, we should have realized that that was probably the same fear that people on the northern side of the border who didn't want to be there felt. And so instead of treating them as all potential enemies, there would have been an opportunity to say, look, the South is worse off economically, societally, and so on. Here's we have the template to build something new and something entirely different. To build, okay, it was a place apart, but maybe it could have been a place apart which people would look at with envy and say, if you're looking for a role model about how to start a state with differing factions, this is how to do it. Not saying that you'd wipe away the whole thing about United Ireland, but actually, for while Northern Ireland lasted, make people feel comfortable. So I think that was a huge mistake. And I think Faulkner recognised that in some of his speeches when he talked about the would-be Carsons, who had, at the time of Sunningdale, as he was driving down the hill from Sunningdale on May the 28th, when he had resigned and the government had come down, and he said, I just looked at all these would-be Carsons who were betraying people because they had nothing to offer them. They had nothing to put in place. The government they wanted had gone. That had gone. It was never coming back, but they couldn't ever say it to the people, and I wasn't given a chance. But also, you look at Trimble. Trimble will tell you that he wasn't given a chance because the people who were attacking him would say, blah blah blah, and he would say, well, where's your alternative? His phrase was, well, where's your viable and available alternative? Which is a great line when you think about it. And they never had it. And if you look at Jim Allister now, Jim Allister says, Windsor frameworks sell out, the protocols are sell out, the DUPs are sell out, the UUPs are sell out, Sunak's are sell out, everybody's a sell out. Jim, where's your viable and available alternative? It doesn't exist. And it's just one of those maddening things, because I'm going to add one thing to that. I'm going to add one thing to that, which is worth adding. Governments, particularly British governments, and I can understand because they do this everywhere. You rescue people who you think can carry the party. There was no incentive to rescue Faulkner, because their belief was that the Ulster Unionist Party was so split then, and that all of unionism was gathered around the United Ulster Unionist Coalition, and the loyalists. The government assumption was that he can't be rescued. And you move forward to Trimble and Blair. Blair decided that Trimble couldn't be rescued, so we let him swing, and they shifted to the DUP. The DUP got through, and then Sunak and Boris Johnson made a decision as well that there's no point trying to rescue the DUP because they were in a hole of their own making. And maybe that feeds into this whole thing about unionism being so divided. Maybe, just maybe, if there'd been a moment after 72, when we didn't have our own parliament, when unionism had said, okay, we don't like this, but we didn't like 1921. We don't like this, but we didn't like that either. So let's for 5 years just give it a chance and see what happens. See where we go with it. Give this assembly, give this convention, just give it a go. Let's work it and see what. But they would never do that, because all they would do was split. And I take the point of unionists who would say, well, Alex, the Sinn Fein and the SDLP had no particular interest in wanting it to work. I take all of that, but sometimes you have to, again, as I say, try not to lead. If you're a commentator, try not to be too often surprised by things. But sometimes it does no harm to your political party to surprise your opponents, and surprise them in a good way.
Just one very quick supplementary, Kevin, if I may. I mean, the figure of Ian Paisley looms large in all of this. I mean, for various unionist leaders, starting with Terence O'Neill, right the way through to David Trimble and beyond. As an Ulster unionist, do you feel your party should have taken Paisley on at some point and sort of said, look, he just keeps bending us all out of shape. We're going to have to push him back, and actually, the whole kind of 50 years is basically the DUP eventually supplanting the UUP. Is there a point where the UUP should have sort of said, dig in, lads, we're going to go right after Paisley, and we're going to push him out of the square?
Well, I think to a certain extent they did. If you go back to Faulkner, when and people forget this, back in 1973, I think it was March 1973, the Ulster Unionist Council, and there was all the guts of 1,000 of them at the time, voted in favour of power sharing. People forget that. People say to me, oh, they only accepted it in 1998. They didn't. The Ulster Unionists took a huge, bold step at that meeting. William Craig basically left the party and set up Vanguard shortly afterwards. Paisley described the whole of the Ulster Unionist Party as an absolute traitor. But Faulkner pushed it. He pushed it through, and he got the assembly up and running. He got Sunningdale up and running. What brought him down wasn't Paisley at that time. It was a combination of the part of his old party, the DUP, Vanguard, the loyalist paramilitaries and so on. That's what did for him, but he actually got them to the line. The problem, I suppose, is that deep down, I always thought, and I have to say I had a reasonably good relationship with Paisley over the years, but deep down, I always thought that he wanted to be the leader of unionism. And I sometimes wonder if we just let him be the leader of unionism, in the midnight. Okay, stuff it. You are now the leader of unionism. Yeah, we are going to sit back. You take over, do what you think is best. Come up with some idea, or even challenge them to come up with ideas. But all we ever did was, every unionist leader in turn, against whether it was of the Ulsters, DUP, or now the DUP getting it from Jim Alistair, it almost made to be that grim satisfaction of bringing down a unionist leader without ever having anything to put in its place. And it's terribly sad, because I've spent my life in unionism, and there are hundreds, thousands of really good, decent people, Kevin, who just want Northern Ireland to work. They don't want this constant badger. They're not uncivil brutes. They're not anti-Catholic. They don't need to see a flag, and they don't need to see the curb. They're fairly tolerant of orange parades and things, because they've seen them for years. They don't understand this modern thing of these huge bonfires where you burn in, is it police cars and things like that. Or they never understood that, if you like, almost the politicization of bonfires is something that my generation didn't grow up with. And I just wish sometimes unionism could say, actually, we can live with this, but that takes something. People who now vote in Alliance are not voting within unionism. It's almost like they gave up, and I think that from my perspective is actually terribly sad, because the people we really needed to stay with us, during the Trimble, the Faulkner years, the Trimble years, they didn't stay, and the DUP are finding it now. They're finding that the key people they need are switching to TUV, but I have no idea, because you could go from the UUP to the DUP. Why do you go to the DUP falls? UUP's not picking up the slack. TUV isn't big enough to pick up the slack. At some point, unions have to ask themselves, who picks up the slack when we run out of, poor sods that we're giving a boot into and saying, "You traitor"? Who are we actually going to say is going to take over and actually give us something that's worth having?
Yeah. Lovely. Thanks for that. Kevin, I'll pass back to you.
Brilliant. Here, Alex, I have a couple of beautiful little quotes from a couple of your previous articles I wanted to ask you about. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to skip all those questions, because I reckon we should only go for about another 10 minutes. And I'm going to prioritize one big question at the end. But I wanted to pick up on something you said to Kevin. Kevin was asking you about this old chestnut, about the criteria for a border poll. And you were saying, well, maybe minimum 10 years, maybe more, and so on and so forth. And it was this question. Now, you might tell me if I'm dogmatic here, Alex, on this. Kevin said, what about if, for example, nationalist parties won the 3 elections in a row, the more votes for United Ireland parties? And you said you don't know, and you said unionists would never accept it. Am I within my right to be absolutely obstinate and confrontational and say they friggin' have to accept it, because that's absolutely clear that United Ireland parties have a majority and therefore we should go to a border poll? Or do you think, well, Kevin, no, you are being dogmatic and you're wrong to think like that? What do you think of?
I don't think you've been dogmatic, and I don't think you've been obstinate. And I can fully understand the logic, because in the absence of that criteria, or for a border poll, then if a nationalist turns out and says, "Oh well, these are the criteria, and these should be the criteria for a border poll," unionists will say to you, I wouldn't, because I just think I really do believe we need the criteria, but unionists will say, "Oh, you can't just make it up yourself. You can't just decide." But I think it's what I said. I think we're reaching the point. I think it will. I suspect if it's going to happen, we'll see it in the next 5 years or so. I think the British and Irish governments will see what happens after the election in the Republican.
That's dead on, Alex.
But I'm going to say, I think there's a moment there when it's just one of those things. I don't want to make it too heavily political. Sinn Fein, I don't want any Sinn Feiners taking offense at this, but I think there's more likelihood of a reasoned debate on the possibility of the criteria for a border poll being put in place and set in stone if the conversation is between a British and Irish government, in which Sinn Fein has a lesser part than if it was the lead party, because it would become a much more political thing. And I don't mean that I don't mean it's any disrespect. I'm just talking sometimes in general politics. When you want things done, it's sometimes easier if it's done. It's like I remember being in the Mansion House in Dublin 4 or 5 years ago with Brian Feeney and a couple of others, and we were having. In fact, it was just before I think Jerry Adams stood down and Mary Lou took over, and somebody from the audience asked me about this, and I just said, to be honest, guys, if you're talking about selling the United Ireland, you are probably the wrong audience to try and sell the United Ireland to unionists. And it's funny, when I was talking to them afterwards, quite a few of them came up, and I think they were angry initially because of this stunned silence. You could see it running across their faces, but I think they saw my point. It's who sells a thing. It's like, it's much more difficult, I think, for the DUP to sell the concept of a United Kingdom and staying in the United Kingdom than it is for the DUP or TUV. And equally, and again, I keep saying this to any of the parties concerned, I think it's probably much easier for the SDLP and Leo Varadkar with the speech he gave at the Ireland's Future 2 or 3 weeks ago, when he actually set out, I was expecting him to say at the end of it, "Now let's have the criteria." But I think he did more to make unionists think about what was going to happen in the next few years than anything that Sinn Fein and Ireland's Future have done in the past 5 years, simply because it's who said it, not what was said.
Yeah, no, that's I hear you, and I've heard other people say that as well. Similar to your thoughts about there's more likelihood of movement if there was a party in power in the south that wasn't Sinn Fein. Let me get to my big juicy question now, which I've been dying to ask you this question for so long. And by the way, I'm going to put a plug in for Fela Phelan Phobal and the debates and discussions, because Alex, we get to take part in the very first debate of all the Friday discussion program in August, when we do that session, that debate about in a border poll, would people vote with the head or the heart? Question mark.
I'm doing that one, aren't I think.
You freaking well are, absolutely.
I just remembered.
And they're going to give our listeners a wee taste of what they expect. But let me sort of like pave the way to the question, because I think you're a very logical, rational, reasoned thinker. You know, you come across as this guy, real product of the Enlightenment. You know, really thinks with his head. And when you think about the South, the Free State, and you look at the days when you would have talked about Rome Rule, you would have looked at the South, you would have said, you know, it was an economic basket case. You would have talked about the fact that there were no social frames around divorce and abortion and gay marriage, etc. And you know, without me having to, you know, go any further, that all this changed utterly in the South of Ireland. Rome Rule is no more. You have the liberalisation of society. You have the huge economic dynamism of the South. It's much more better off, and so on and so forth. And it's also got EU membership. And you look at the North, and you look at Britain, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but a bit of a basket case at the moment. So logically speaking, if you were thinking with a head, you'd probably say the idea of United Ireland seems very attractive. Yet, Alex, you yourself go, no, I'm a unionist through and through. So my question is, and we'll get to discuss this much more at Fela, but, you know, in that border poll, Alex, are you voting with a head or are you voting with a heart? Discuss.
I think I'm voting with I probably will end up voting with the heart. And I'll tell you why. Although I would encourage my children to, you know, as the advice my father gave years ago. And I think it's because I have almost too much baggage now. I have too many memories. I have too much that went on in the past and too much hurt. And also, I think it becomes a more difficult argument for unionism because, as you say, it has changed. If you had this debate, you know, back in the early 70s or even early 80s, I think the United Kingdom argument would have won hands down. But there has been a huge change in the South, but also a huge change in the North, where there are a lot of atheists, there are a lot of agnostics, there are a lot of social liberals and things like that who weren't, you know, in the game at that stage. And I would expect a younger generation. I think my children and only one of them at the minute would have a vote in that sort of referendum. But I like to think that they will learn from me to think long, hard, and carefully about what choice they would make. But it's a much more difficult choice that they will have than I had, because this sounds like a cop-out, but it's not. I think I'm almost too old to change my ways, simply because I'm a citizen. I was born into the United Kingdom. I'm a citizen of the United Kingdom. I feel like a citizen of the United Kingdom. I feel like that is where my culture and history and sense of politics come from. I think it would be extraordinarily difficult for me, because I don't think there'll be a border poll in 10 years. I'd probably be dead by then anyway. But I don't think at this point. I wouldn't object to it. I wouldn't lead a campaign against it or anything like that, because at my age, I think sometimes you just have to leave the next generation to make their own decisions. But I think personally, it will still be a heart and baggage. If it was tomorrow, it would still be a heart and baggage one for me. If I was 45 now, I think the head would probably take. Oh, your cat's just jumped up there.
Sorry, that's Roisin. I'll just put her back.
Hello, Roisin. I like cats.
Sorry.
But yes, I think that's a very long-winded, and I will remember it word for word and give exactly the same answer on August the 1st. But yes, I think right now it would be a sort of heart and baggage decision. But if I was 45 years old, I think, because I would have longer to live in the United Ireland, longer to live in the United Kingdom. And I think that even 10 years ago, it was, do you want to live in the United Kingdom, blah, 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 which is inside the European Union, or United Ireland, blah, 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 inside the European Union. Now we're not in the European Union. So there are people who would never have thought of voting for United Ireland. That one factor alone could have shifted 15% the other way. So that's one.
Alex, this is fascinating, and we're only warming up for the big failure debate. But I have to push you a fraction more. I can't help myself. And then I'll be finished, Kevin Maher, in about 1 minute, 2 minutes maybe. And then if you want to finish with anything, Kevin, that'll be it, and we'll have wrapped up. So, Alex, you do really strike me as Renaissance man, as Enlightenment man, as this guy who's so open-minded and listens to the arguments and debates. So see, and I love your honesty here that you said you'd vote with the heart. But is there just a big, like, I don't know what the phrase is, a big section of your body, of your brain or your heart or whatever it is, which just says no-go area for open-minded, rational inquiry about the pros and cons of why your kids might be better, or even if God spurs you and have a long life, that you might be better in the United Ireland. I'm curious to just genuinely, in the spirit of honest inquiry, just pick a little deeper at your thoughts about whether that side of you is open to persuasion, or is it, I mean, correct me if I could be wrong the way I'm putting this, is it the history of IRA violence and everything and the Troubles that's basically just made you think that you just can't go there to even entertain the possibility of, like, being supportive of a United Ireland if it was better economically and socially and politically, and all the arrangements seem to stack up? You just wouldn't go there. It's just like the case is shut and closed.
No, to be honest, I'm not saying I wouldn't go there, and I think I very deliberately didn't use that phrase. I said, and I stand by it, that I just, given the baggage and history, my own baggage and history as well, that I'm not sure I'm ready for that huge leap, and because it is about my citizenship, it is about my identity, and for all of us, those are the questions. But if you're saying, will I listen? Of course I will listen. I expect to be, when the debate starts, if I'm still writing and talking, I expect both sides to say, Alex, come and give us your views, and let's have a discussion. I will take part in those debates, but I don't think I will be, as I've always done with every debate I've been involved in the past 50 years, I will write what I believe, what I think is, but I don't want to get in, and I won't get into the thing because of my age thing. I'm not going to say to people, I would never vote for that, because I'm not going to, unlike Brexit, unlike some other decisions I've had to make, like the Good Friday Agreement and so on, I'm not going to live that. So I will say, basically, I will say to everyone who goes to read it and says to my children what I say to my children: make your decision. I don't think I'm ready for that, but to be honest, I've surprised myself over the years, and I'm not saying I couldn't surprise myself again.
Alex, I really like your answer. I think it's very, very honest. And here's a bonus question. You have to answer one sentence. If we get to the border poll and say it's, and let's just say it's 8 to 10 years, try and give this one sentence answer. It's a very hard question. What percentage of people in the 6 counties do you think will vote with the head as opposed to the heart? Any rough idea on that? It's a hard question, but I'm just curious.
Well, I won't give you a percentage, but I will say I think the vast majority of people will vote with the heart. Because when you're talking about identity and citizenship, everyone who votes in any election, they vote on the basis of what the government will do or what the new situation will do in terms of their personal life, in terms of their personal, will they feel safe? Will they feel secure? Will they feel part of that place? That's all heart stuff, because your head can't fathom that. Your head can't work that out, because only history, only time will tell that. So I think most people, 80% have probably decided one way or the other. There will be people, no matter how terrible it was, will vote for United Ireland, and people who think no matter how will vote for United Kingdom. So they are the heart people. This will be won, as most big debates are actually won, by the ones in the middle who are willing to be rational and who are willing to maybe surprise themselves. So rational, so willing to surprise themselves that they will start saying no, and they then saying yes, because they've listened to all of the arguments. My fear would be, as it is with politics in Northern Ireland, we don't want to listen to the argument because we don't want to be persuaded one way or the other. And I don't just mean avoidable, I just mean politics generally.
Alex, that was brilliant, mate. And what's going to happen here, when I hand over to Kevin Maher, Kevin, you can say the final closing words and you can wrap it up. But can I just say, Alex, as well, if anybody's interested, in particular in our last couple of minutes conversation, they know where to find us in the very first debate of the failure programme at St Mary's College in the Falls Road. We're going to have a good hour and a half or whatever it is to debate this further about the head and the heart and the border poll. Alex, can I say thank you very much? That while back when I emailed you out of the blue and said, I'm Kevin Rooney, do you fancy coming on Irish Border Poll podcast? And, within a second you were bang. Yes, I'm up for that, Kevin. And
4 months later, I turned up for it.
Yes, we had a couple of little delays along the road, but that's all part of life. And even again, when I asked you, did you fancy taking part in our wee Friday discussion coming up, straight away you came and said yes. And for what it's worth, Alex, I've never met you before, but I love your writing. I love you in the Irish Times. I love you in the Irish News. I love you in that little County Down newspaper that you read for. You write for occasionally, and I love hearing you commentating the various programs. You're a breath of fresh air, and you're intelligent. Always worth listening to. Always, Alex. So thanks a million for coming on. And
keep talking. I'm enjoying this. Keep going. It's great.
Oh no, but it's all true, Alex. It's all true. We only get people on the Irish Border Poll who we think are very intelligent, very interesting, and never mind the criteria for a border poll. You fulfill all our criteria, 1,000,000%. So, Alex, from the bottom of my heart, before I pass on to Kevin to wrap it up, thanks a million for speaking to us and giving us your thoughts.
Very welcome. I'll see you on August the 1st.
I'll see you in August. And Kevin, over to you now.
Just very finally, just again, Alex, thank you for your time and your honesty, which is I think your kind of hallmark, really. I'm a great admirer of your writing as well, and even when I don't always agree with perhaps your take on something, I do respect the fact that it's an intelligent and wise take on it. And I know you're a big fan of Sherlock Holmes as well. You do mention that from time to time, and I'm just reminded of that remark about when you've eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. And I'm just struck by your kind of time horizon, that perhaps this next 5 to 10 years is going to be very, very crucial in a way that in a way that perhaps unionists and nationalists can at least agree on that point at least. So thanks again for joining us. Thanks again for your insights and your honesty, and it's been great to talk to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a happy 12th.
Same to yourself, Alex. Thanks very much.
Take care. Bye. Bye, guys.
All the best.
All the best.